Many of the HBO show and the Song of Ice and Fire followers believe the Targaryen Civil War started from King Viserys, the first Targaryen's rule, as it is portrayed in the HBO adaptation House of the Dragon. But that account is far from the truth. In this video, I will be discussing when exactly the Targaryen Civil War started. So, stay tuned. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification in order not to miss any of our exclusive videos. Now let's get to it. King Aegon, the first Targaryen, took both of his sisters to wife. The Targaryen sisters were dragon riders with silver gold hair, purple eyes, and beauty of a kind. Each of them gave the king a son. Aenys came first and was born in 7 AC to Aegon's younger wife, Rhaenys. The boy was small at birth and sickly. He cried all the time, and it was said that his limbs were spindly, his eyes small and watery, and that the king's maesters feared for his survival. He would spit out the nipples of his witness and give suck only at his mother's breasts, and rumors claimed that he screamed for a fortnight when he was weaned. Unlike King Aegon, many observers suggested that his grace was not the boy's true sire, that Aenys was some bastard born of one of Queen Rhaenys' many household favorites, the son of a singer or a mama or a mime, and the prince was slow to grow as well. Not until he was given the young dragon Quicksilver, a hatchling born that same year on Dragonstone. Thus, Aenys Targaryen began to thrive. Aenys was 3 when his mother, Queen Rhaenys, and her dragon Meraxes were slain in Dawn. And that left the boy prince inconsolable. He stopped eating, and he even began to crawl as he had when he was 1, as if he had forgotten how to walk. His father despaired of him. Rumors flew around the court that King Aegon might take another wife, as Rhaenys was dead, and Visenya, childless, and perhaps barren. The king kept his own counsel on these matters, so no man could say what thoughts he might have entertained. But many great lords and noble knights appeared at court with their maiden daughters, each comelier than the last. All such speculation ended in 11 AC when Queen Visenya suddenly announced that she was carrying the king's child, a son she proclaimed confidently. And so he proved to be that. The prince came falling into the world in 12 AC. No newborn was ever more robust than Maegor Targaryen. Maesters and midwives agreed his weight at birth was almost twice that of his elder brother. The half-brothers were never close. Prince Aenys was the heir apparent, and King Aegon kept him close by his side. As the king moved about the realm from castle to castle, so did the prince. Prince Maegor remained with his mother, sitting by her side when she held court. When the Aegon was not on a royal progress, he would return to King's Landing and the Aegon fort, whilst Visenya and her son remained on Dragonstone. For this reason, lords and commons alike began to refer to Maegor as the Prince of Dragonstone. Queen Visenya put a sword into her son's hand when he was 3. Supposedly the first thing he did with the blade was butcher the castle cat, one man said. Now the prince's prowess in swordplay was undeniable. However, for his first master of arms, his mother chose Sir Corbury, as deadly a knight in all the 7 kingdoms. Aenys was a fine singer himself, as it happened, with a strong, sweet voice. He was courteous and charming, clever without being bookish. He made friends easily, and young girls seemed to crash on him, be it high-born or low. And he loved to write as well. His father gave him courses, palfreys and darteries, but his favorite mount was his dragon Quicksilver. Prince Maegor rode as well, but has no great love for horses, dogs, or any animal. When he was 8, a palfrey kicked him in the stables. Maegor stabbed the horse to death and slashed half the face of the stable boy, who came running at the beast's screams. The Prince of Dragonstone had many companions through the years, but no true friends. He was a quarrelsome boy, quick to take offense, slow to forgive, fearsome in his wrath. His skill with weapons was unmatched. However, as squire at 8, he was unhorsing boys 4 and 5 years his elder in the lists. By the time he was 12 and battering seasoned men-at-arms into submission in the castle yard. On his 13th name day in 25 AC, his mother, Queen Visenya, bestowed her own Balerion steel blade, dark sister, upon him, half a year before his marriage. The tradition amongst the Targaryens had always been to marry kin to kin. Wedding brother to sister was thought to be ideal. Failing that, a girl might wed an uncle, a cousin, or a nephew, a boy, a cousin, aunt, or niece. This practice went back to old Valyria, where it was common amongst many of the ancient families, particularly those who bred and rode dragons. The blood of the dragon must remain pure, the wisdom went. Some of the sorcerer princes also took more than one wife when he pleased them, though this was less common than incestuous marriage. In Valyria, before the doom, wise men wrote, 1,000 gods were honored, but none were feared. So few dared to speak against these customs. This was not true in Westeros, but the power of the faith went unquestioned. The old gods were still worshipped in the north and the drowned guard in the Iron Islands. But in the rest of the realm, there was a single god with 7 faces, and his voice upon this earth was a high septon of Old Town, and the doctrines of the faith, handed down through centuries from Andalos itself, condemned the Valyrian marriage customs as practiced by the Targaryens. Incest was denounced as a vile sin, whether between father and daughter, mother and son, or brother and sister, and the fruits of such unions were considered abominations in the sight of gods and men. With hindsight, it can be seen that conflict between the faith and House Targaryen was inevitable. Indeed, many amongst the most devout had expected the High Septon to speak out against Aegon and his sisters during the conquest, and were most displeased when the father of the faithful instead counseled Lord Hightower against opposing the dragon, and even blessed and anointed him at his second coronation. Familiarity is the father of acceptance, it is said. The High Septon, who had crowned Aegon the Conqueror, remained the shepherd of the faithful until his death in 11 AC, by which time the realm had grown accustomed to the notion of a king with 2 queens, who were both wives and sisters. King Aegon always took care to honor the faith, confirming its traditional rights and privileges, exempting its wealth and property from taxation, and affirming that septons, scepters, and other servants of the 7 accused of wrongdoing could only be tried by the faith's own courts. The accord between the faith and the Iron Throne continued all through the reign of Aegon, the first from 11 AC to 37 AC, 6 high septons wearing the crystal crown. His Grace remained on good terms with each of them, calling at the Starry Sept each time he came to Old Town. Yet the question of incestuous marriage remained, simmering below the courtesies like poison. Whilst the High Septon of King Aegon's reign never spoke out against the king's marriage to his sisters, neither did they declare it to be lawful. The humbler members of the faith, village septons, holy sisters, begging brothers, poor fellows still believed it sinful for a brother to lie with a sister, or for a man to take 2 wives. Aegon, the Conqueror, had fathered no daughters, so these matters did not come to a head at once. The sons of the dragon had no sisters to marry, so each of them was forced to seek elsewhere for a bride. Aenys was the first to marry. In 22 AC, he wed the Lady Alyssa, the maiden daughter of the Lord of the Tides, Aethon Balerion, King Aegon's Lord Admiral and Master of Ships. She was 15, the same age as the prince, and shared his silvery hair and purple eyes as well, for the Valerians were an ancient family descended from Valerian stock. King Aegon's own mother had been a Valerian, so the marriage was reckoned one of cousin to cousin. It soon proved both happy and fruitful. The following year, Alyssa gave birth to a daughter. Prince Aenys named her Rhaena, in honor of his mother. Like her father, the girl was small at birth, but unlike him, she proved to be a happy, healthy child, with lively lilac eyes and hair that shone like beaten silver. It was written that King Aegon himself wept the first time his granddaughter was placed in his arms, and thereafter doted upon the child, perhaps in some part because she reminded him of his lost Queen Rhaenys, in whose memory she had been named. As the glad tidings of Rhaena's birth spread across the land, the realm rejoiced, save perhaps for Queen Visenya. Prince Aenys, with the unquestioned heir to the throne, all agreed. But now an issue arose as to whether Prince Maegor remained, second in the line of succession, or should be considered to have fallen to third behind the newborn princess. Queen Visenya proposed to settle the matter by betrothing the infant Rhaena to Maegor, who had just turned 11. Aenys and Alyssa spoke against the match, however, and when word reached the Starry Sept, the High Septon sent a raven, warning the king that such a marriage would not be looked upon with favor by the faith. His High Holiness proposed a different bride for Maegor, his own niece, Ceres Hightower, maiden daughter to the Lord of Oldtown, Manfred Hightower, not to be confused with his grandsire of the same name. King Aegon, mindful of the advantages of closer ties with Oldtown and its ruling house, saw wisdom in the choice and agreed to the match. Thus it came to pass that in 25 AC, Maegor Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, wed Lady Ceres Hightower in the Starry Sept of Oldtown, with the High Septon himself performing the nuptials. Maegor was 13, the bride 10 years his senior. But the lords who bore witness to the bedding all agreed that the prince made a lusty husband, and Maegor himself boasted that he had consummated the marriage a dozen times that night. "I made a son for House Targaryen last night," he proclaimed as he broke fast. The son came the next year, but the boy, named Aegon after his grandsire, was born to Lady Alyssa and fathered by Prince Aenys. Once again, celebrations swept the Seven Kingdoms. The little prince was robust and fierce, and had a warrior's look about him, declared his grandsire Aegon the Dragon himself. While many still debated whether Prince Maegor or his niece Rhaena should have precedence in the order of succession, it seemed beyond question that Aegon would follow his father Aenys, just as Aenys would follow Aegon. In the years that followed, other children came, one after the other, to House Targaryen to the delight of King Aegon, if not necessarily that of Queen Visenya. In 29 AC, Prince Aegon acquired a baby brother, when Alyssa gave Prince Aenys a second son, Viserys. In 34 AC, she gave birth to Jaehaerys, her fourth child and third son. In 36 AC came another daughter, Alysanne. Princess Rhaena was 13 when her little sister was born, but Grand Maester Gawain observed that the girl delighted the babe, that one might think she was the mother herself. The eldest daughter of Aenys and Alyssa was a shy, dreamy child, who seemed to be more comfortable with animals than other children. As a little girl, she often hid behind her mother's skirt or clung to her father's leg in the presence of strangers, but she loved to feed the castle cats, and always had a puppy or two in the bed. Though her mother provided her with a succession of suitable companions, the daughters of lords, great and small, Rhaena never seemed to warm to any of them, preferring the company of a book. At the age of 9, however, Rhaena was presented with a hatchling from the pits of Dragonstone, and she and the young dragon she named Dreamfire bonded instantly. With her dragon beside her, the princess slowly began to grow, and she grew out of her shyness. At the age of 12, she took to the skies for the first time, and thereafter, though she remained a quiet girl, no one dared to call her timid. Not long after, Rhaena made her first true friend in the person of her cousin, Larissa Balerion. For a time, the two girls were inseparable, until Larissa was suddenly recalled to Driftmark to be wed to the second son of the Even Star of Tarth. The young are nothing if not resilient, however. The princess soon found a new companion in the Hand's daughter, Samantha Stokewell. It was Princess Rhaena, legend says, who put a dragon's egg in Princess Alysanne's cradle, just as she had for Prince Jaehaerys 2 years earlier. If those tales are true, from those eggs came the dragons Silverwing and Vermithor, whose names would be written so large in the annals of the years to come. Princess Rhaena's love for her sister, and the realm's joy at each new Targaryen princeling, was not shared by Prince Maegor or his mother, Queen Visenya, for each new son born to Aenys pushed Maegor farther down in the line of succession, and there were still those who claimed he stood behind Aenys's daughters too. And all the while, Maegor himself remained childless, for Lady Ceres did not quicken in the years that followed their marriage. On tourney ground and battlefield, however, Prince Maegor's accomplishments far exceeded those of his brother. In the great tourney at River Run in 28 AC, Maegor unhorsed 3 knights of the King's Guard in successive tilts before falling to the eventual champion. In the melee, No man could stand before him. Afterward he was knighted on the field by his father, who dubbed him with no lesser blade than Blackfyre. At 10 and 6, Maegor became the youngest knight in the Seven Kingdoms. Other feats followed. In 29 AC and again in 30 AC, Maegor accompanied Osmond Strong and Aethon Balerion to the Stepstones to root out Lycene pirate king Sargusso's son, and fought in several bloody affrays, showing himself to be both fearless and deadly. In 31 AC, he hunted down and slew a notorious robber knight in the Riverlands, the so-called Giant of the Trident. Maegor was not yet a dragon rider, though a dozen hatchlings had been born amidst the fires of Dragonstone in the later years of Aegon's reign, and were offered to the prince. He refused them all. When his young niece, Rhaena, in only her 12th year, took to the sky astride Dreamfire, Maegor's failure became the talk of King's Landing. Lady Alyssa teased him about it one day in court, wondering aloud whether my good brother is afraid of dragons. Prince Maegor darkened in rage at the jab, then replied coolly that there was only one dragon worthy of him. The last 7 years of the reign of the Dragon of the Trident were not long of a struggle. The last 7 years of the reign of Aegon the Conqueror were peaceful ones. After the frustrations of his Dornish war, the king accepted the continuous independence of Dorne, and flew to Sunspear on Balerion, and on the 10th anniversary of the peace accord, to celebrate a feast of friendship with Daria Martell, the reigning princess of Dorne. Prince Aenys accompanied him on Quicksilver. Maegor remained on Dragonstone. Aegon had made the Seven Kingdoms one with fire and blood, but after celebrating his 60th name day in 33 AC, he turned instead to brick and mortar. Half of every year was still given over to royal progress, but now it was Prince Aenys and his wife, Lady Alyssa, who journeyed from castle to castle, whilst the aging king remained at home, dividing his days between Dragonstone and King's Landing. The fishing village where Aegon had first landed had grown into a sprawling, stinking city of 100,000 souls by that time. Only Old Town and Lannisport were larger. Yet in many ways, King's Landing was still little more than an army camp that had swollen to grotesque size, dirty, reeking, unplanned, impermanent. And the Aegon fort, which had spread halfway down Aegon's high hill by that time, was as ugly a castle as any in the Seven Kingdoms, a great confusion of wood and earth and brick that had long outgrown the old log palisades that were its only walls. It was certainly no fit abode for a great king. In 35 AC, Aegon moved, with all his court, back to Dragonstone, and gave orders that the Aegon fort be torn down, so that a new castle might be raised in its place. This time, he decreed, he would build in stone. To oversee the design and construction of the new castle, he named the King's Hand, Lord Alan Stokeworth. Sir Osmond Strong had died the previous year, and Queen Visenya. A jape went about the court that King Aegon had given Visenya charge of building the Red Keep, so he would not have to endure her presence on Dragonstone. Aegon the Conqueror died of a stroke on Dragonstone in the 37th year of the king's reign. His great-grandson, Aegon and Viserys, were with him at his death in the chamber of the Painted Table. The king was showing them the details of his conquests. Prince Maegor, in residence at Dragonstone at the time, spoke the eulogy as his father's body was laid upon a funeral pyre in the castle yard. The king was clad in battle armor, his mailed hands folded over the hilt of Blackfyre. Since the days of old Valyria, it has been the custom of the Targaryens to burn their dead, rather than consigning their remains to the ground. Vhagar supplied the flames to light the fire. Blackfyre was burned with the king, but retrieved by Maegor afterward. It played darker, but elsewise unharmed. No common fire can damage Valyrian steel. The dragon was survived by his sister Visenya, his sons Aenys and Maegor, and 5 grandchildren. Prince Aenys was 30 years of age at his father's death. Prince Maegor, 25. Aenys had been at Highgarden on his progress when his father died, but Quicksilver returned him to Dragonstone for the funeral. Afterward he donned his father's iron and ruby crown, and Grand Maester Garwin proclaimed him Aenys of House Targaryen, the first of his name, King of the Andals and the Rhoynar. and the first men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and protector of the realm. The lords who had come to Dragonstone to bid their king farewell knelt and bowed their heads. When Prince Maegor's turn came, Aenys drew him back to his feet, kissed his cheek, and said, "Brother, you need never kneel to me again. We shall rule this realm together, you and I." Then the king presented his father's sword, Blackfyre, to his brother, saying, "You are more fit to bear this blade than me. Wield it in my service, and I shall be content." This bequest would prove to be most unwise, as later events would demonstrate. Since Queen Visenya had previously gifted her son with Dark Sister, Prince Maegor now possessed both of the ancestral Balerion steel swords of House Targaryen. From this date forward, however, he would wield only Blackfyre, whilst Dark Sister hung on the walls of his chambers on Dragonstone. After the funeral rites had been completed, the King of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the King of the Inns made their way to the castle, where the Iron Throne stood amidst mounds of rubble and mud. The old Aegon fort had been torn down, and pits and tunnels pockmarked the hill, where the cellars and foundations of the Red Keep were being dug. But the new castle had not yet begun to rise. Nonetheless, thousands came to cheer King Aenys, as he claimed his father's seat for his own. Thereafter, His Grace set out for Old Town to receive the blessing of the High Septon. Though he could have made the journey in a few short days on Quicksilver, Aenys preferred to travel by land, accompanied by 300 mounted knights and their retinues. Queen Alyssa rode beside him, together with their 3 eldest children. Princess Rhaena was 14 years of age, a beautiful young girl who stole the heart of every knight who saw her. Prince Aegon was 11, Prince Viserys 8. Their younger siblings, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, were deemed too young for such an arduous journey and remained on Dragonstone. After setting out from King's Landing, the king's party made its way south to Storm's End, then west across the Dornish marches to Old Town, guesting at each castle on the way. His return would be by way of Highgarden, Lannisport, and River Run, it was decreed. All along the route, the small folk appeared by the hundreds of thousands to hail their new king and queen. The young princes and princesses cheered and cheered, but whilst Aegon and Viserys relished in the cheers of the crowds and the feasts and frolics put on at every castle to entertain the new monarch and his family, Princess Rhaena reverted to her former shyness. At Storm's End, Orys Baratheon's Maester went so far as to write, "The princess did not seem to want to be there, nor did she approve of anything she saw or heard. She scarce seemed to eat, would not hunt or walk. And when pressed to sing, for she is said to have a lovely voice, she refused rudely and returned to her chambers. The princess had been most loath to be parted from her dragon, Dreamfire, and her latest favorite, Melanie Piper, a red-haired maiden from the Riverlands. It was only when her mother, Queen Alyssa, sent for Lady Melanie to join them on the Progress that Rhaena finally put aside her sullenness to join the celebrations. At the Starry Sept, the High Septon anointed Aenys Targaryen as his predecessor had once anointed his father, and presented him with a crown of yellow gold, with the faces of the 7 inlaid in jade and pearl. Yet even as Aenys was receiving the blessing of the Father of the Faithful, others were casting doubt on his fitness to sit on the Iron Throne. Westeros required a warrior, they whispered to one another, and Maegor was plainly the stronger of the dragon's 2 sons. Among the whisperers was the Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen. The truth is plain enough, she is reported to have said. Even Aenys sees it. Why else would he have given Blackfyre to my son? He knows that only Maegor has the strength to rule. The new king's mettle would be tested sooner than anyone could have imagined. The wars of conquest had left scars throughout the realm. Sons now come of age, dreamed of avenging long-dead fathers. Knights remembered the days when a man with a sword and a horse and a suit of armor could slash his way to riches and glory. Lords recalled a time when they did not need a king's leave to tax their small folk or kill their enemies. The chains the dragon forged can yet be broken. The discontented one told one another, "We can win our freedoms back, But now is the time to strike, for this new king is weak. The first stirrings of revolt were in the Riverlands, amidst the colossal ruins of Harrenhal. Aegon had granted the castle to Sir Quentyn Cohaeris, his old master-at-arms. When Lord Cohaeris died in a fall from his horse in 9 AC, his title passed to his grandson, Gargon, a fat and foolish man with an unseemly appetite for young girls, who became known as Gargon the Guest. Lord Gargon soon became infamous for turning up at every wedding celebrated within his domains, so that he might enjoy the lord's right of the first night. A more unwelcome wedding guest can scarcely be imagined. He also made free with the wives and daughters of his own servants. King Aenys was still on his progress, guesting with Lord Tully of Riverrun on his way back to King's Landing, when the father of a maid whom Lord Cohaeris had honored opened a postern gate at Harrenhal to an outlaw who styled himself Harren the Red, and claimed to be a grandson of Harren the Black. The brigands pulled his lordship from his bed and dragged him to the castle Godswood, where Harren sliced off his genitals and fed them to a dog. A few leal men-at-arms were killed. The rest agreed to join Harren, who declared himself Lord of Harrenhal and King of the Rivers. Not being iron-born, he did not claim the islands. When word reached Riverrun, Lord Tully urged the king to mount Quicksilver and descend on Harrenhal as his father had. But his grace, perhaps mindful of his mother's death in Dawn, instead commanded Tully to summon his banners and lingered at Riverrun as they gathered. Only when 1,000 men were assembled did Aenys march. But when his men reached Harrenhal, they found it empty but for corpses. Harren the Red had put Lord Gargon's servants to the sword and taken his band into the woods. By the time Aenys returned to King's Landing, the news had grown even worse. In the Vale, Lord Ronald, Harren's younger brother Jonas, had deposed and imprisoned his loyal sibling, and declared himself King of Mountain and Vale. In the Iron Islands, another priest-king had walked out of the sea, announcing himself to be Lodos, the twice-drowned, the son of the dragon. King Aenys knew these rebels had to be put down, but seemed unable to decide where to begin. Grand Maester Garn wrote that the king could not comprehend why this was happening. The small folk loved him, did they not? Jonas Arryn, this new Lodos, the Vulture King. Had he wronged them? If they had grievances, why not bring them to him? I would have heard them out. His Grace spoke of sending messengers to the rebels to learn the reasons for their actions. Fearing that King's Landing might not be safe with Harren the Red alive and near, he sent Queen Alyssa and their younger children to Dragonstone. He commanded his hand-lord, Alyn Stokeworth, to take a fleet and army to the Vale to put down Jonas Arryn and restore his brother Ronel to the lordship. But when the ships were about to sail, he countermanded the order, fearing that Stokeworth's departure would leave King's Landing undefended. Instead, he sent the Hand with a few hundred men to hunt down Harren the Red, and decided he would summon a great council to discuss how best to put down the other rebels. Whilst the king quibbled, his lords took to the field. Some acted on their own authority, others in consent with the Dowager Queen. In the Vale, Lord Allard Royce of Runestone assembled 200 loyal bannermen and marched against the Eyrie, easily defeating the supporters of the self-styled King of Mountain and Vale. But when they demanded the release of their rightful Lord Jonas, Arryn sent his brother to them through the Moon Door. Such was the sad end of Ronel Arryn, who had flown thrice about the Giant's Lance on Dragonback. The Eyrie was impregnable to any conventional assault, so King Jonas and his die-hard followers spat down defiance of the Loyalists and settled in for a siege until Prince Maegor appeared in the sky above astride Balerion. The Conqueror's younger son had claimed a dragon at last, none other than the Black Dread, the greatest of them all. Rather than face Balerion's fires, the Eyre's garrison seized the Pretender and delivered him to Lord Royce, opening the Moon Door once again and serving Jonas the Kinslayer as he had served his brother. Surrender saved the Pretender's followers from burning, but not from death. After taking possession of the Eyrie, Prince Maegor executed them to a man. Even the highest born amongst them were denied the honor of dying by sword. Traitors deserved only a rope. Maegor decreed so. The captured knights were hanged naked from the walls of the Eyrie. kicking as they strangled slowly. Hubert Arryn, a cousin to the dead brothers, was installed as Lord of the Vale. As he had already sired 6 sons by his lady wife, a Royce of Runestone, the Arryn's succession was seen to be secure. In the Iron Islands, Goran Greyjoy, Lord Reaper of Pike, brought King Lodos II of that name to a similar swift end, marshalling 100 long ships to descend on Old Wick and Great Wick, where the Pretender's followers were most numerous, and putting thousands of them to the sword. Afterward he had the head of the priest-king pickled in brine and sent to King's Landing. King Aenys was so pleased by the gift that he offered Greyjoy any boon he might desire. This proved unwise, Lord Goran, wishing to prove himself a true son of the drowned god, asked the king for the right to expel all the septons and scepters who had come to the Iron Islands after the conquest to convert the Ironborn to the worship of the Seven. King Aenys had no choice but to agree. The largest and most threatening rebellion remained that of the Vulture King along the Dornish marches. Although Princess Daria continued to issue denunciations from Sunspear, there were many who suspected that she was playing a double game, for she did not take the field against the rebels, and was rumored to be sending them men, money, and supplies. Whether that was true or not, hundreds of Dornish knights and several thousand seasoned spearmen had joined the Vulture King's rabble, and the rabble itself had swelled enormously to more than 30,000 men. So large had his host become that the Vulture King made an ill-considered decision and divided his strength. Whilst he marched west against Nightsong and Horn Hill with half the Dornish power, the other half went east to besiege Stonehelm, seat of House Swan, under the command of Lord Walter Will, the son of the widow mother. Both hosts met with disaster. Orys Baratheon, known now as Orys One Hand, rode forth from Storm's End one last time to smash the Dornish beneath the walls of Stonehelm. When Walter Will was delivered to him alive, Lord Orys said, "Your father took my hand, I claim yours as repayment." So saying, he hacked off Lord Walter's sword hand. Then he took his other hand and both his feet as well, calling them his usury. Strange to say, Lord Baratheon died on the march back to Storm's End of the wounds he himself had taken during the battle. But his son Davos always said he died content, smiling at the rotting hands and feet that dangled in his tent like a string of onions. The Vulture King himself fared little better. Unable to capture Nightsong, he abandoned the siege and marched west, only to have Lady Caren sally forth behind him to join up with a strong force of marchers led by Harmon Dondarrion, the mutilated lord of Blackhaven. Meanwhile, Lord Samuel Tarly of Horn Hill suddenly appeared to thwart the Dornish line of march with several thousand knights and archers. Savage Sam, that lord was called, and so he proved in the bloody battle that ensued, cutting down dozens of Dornish men with his great Valyrian steel blade, Heartbane. The Vulture King had twice as many men as his 3 foes combined, but most were untrained and undisciplined, and when faced with armored knights at front and rear, their ranks shattered. Throwing down their spears and shields, the Dornish broke and ran, making for the distant mountains, where the Marcher lords rode after them, and cut them down in what became known after as the Vulture Hunt. As for the rebel king himself, the man who called himself the Vulture King was taken alive and tied naked between 2 posts by savage Sam Tarly. The singers like to say that he was torn to pieces by the very vultures from whom he took his style, but in truth he perished of thirst and exposure, and the birds did not descend on him until well after he was dead. In later years, several other men would take the title Vulture King, but whether they were of the same blood as the first, no man could say. His death is generally accounted as the end of the Second Dornish War, though that is somewhat of a misnomer, since no Dornish lords ever took the field, and Princess Daria continued to vilify the Vulture King until his end, and took no part in his campaigns. The first of the rebels proved to be the last, as well, for Harren the Red was at last brought to bay in a village west of the God's Eye. The Ironborn King did not die meekly. In his last fight, he slew the king's hand, Lord Alan Stokeworth, before being cut down by Stokeworth's squire, Verna Brune. The grateful king, Aenys, conferred knighthood on Brune, and rewarded Davos Baratheon, Samuel Tarly, No-Nose Dondarrion, Ellen Caron, Allard Royce, and Goran Greyjoy with gold, offices, and honors, the greatest recognition he bestowed on his own brother. On his return to King's Landing, Prince Maegor was hailed as a hero. King Aenys embraced him before a cheering throng and named him Hand of the King. And when 2 young dragons hatched amidst the fire pits of Dragonstone at the end of that year, it was taken for a sign. But the amity between the dragon's sons did not long endure. It may be that conflict was inevitable, for the 2 brothers had very different natures. King Aenys loved his wife, his children, and his people, and wished only to be loved in turn. Sword and lance had lost whatever appeal they ever had for him. Instead, his grace dabbled in alchemy, astronomy, and astrology, delighted in music and dance, wore the finest silks, semites, and velvets, and enjoyed the company of maesters, seers, and knights. He was a man of acceptance and wits. His brother Maegor, taller, broader, and fearsomely strong, had no patience for any of that, but lived for war, tourneys, and battle. He was rightly regarded as one of the finest knights in Westeros, though his savagery in the field and his harshness toward defeated foes was often remarked upon as well. King Aenys sought always to please. When faced with difficulties, he would answer with soft words. But Maegor's reply was ever steel and fire. Grand Maester Gawain wrote that Aenys trusted everyone, Maegor no one. The king was easily influenced, Gawain observed, swaying this way and that like a reed in the wind, like as not to heed whichever counselor last had his ear. Prince Maegor, on the other hand, was rigid as an iron rod, unyielding, unbending. Despite such differences, the sons of the dragon continued to rule together amicably for the best part of 2 years. But in 39 AC, Queen Alyssa gave King Aenys yet another heir, a girl she named Bella, who sadly died in the cradle not long after. Perhaps it was this continued proof of the queen's fertility that drove Prince Maegor to do what he did. Whatever the reason, the prince shocked the realm and the king both when he suddenly announced that Lady Cerys was barren, and that he had therefore taken a second wife in Alice Hathaway, the daughter of the new Lord of Harrenhal. The wedding was performed on Dragonstone, under the guidance of the Dowager Queen Visenya. As the castle septon refused to officiate, Maegor and his new bride were joined in a Balerion rite, wed by blood and fire. The marriage took place without the leave, knowledge, or presence of King Aenys. When it became known, the 2 half-brothers quarreled bitterly. Nor was his grace alone in his wrath. Manfred Hightower, father of Lady Cerys, made a protest to the king, demanding that Lady Alice be put aside. And in the starry sept at Old Town, the High Septon went even further, denouncing Maegor's marriage as sin and fornication, and calling the prince's new bride this whore of Hathaway. No true son or daughter of the Seven would ever bow to such, he thundered. Prince Maegor remained defiant. His father had taken both of his sisters to wife, he pointed out. The rebukes of the faith might rule lesser men, but not the blood of the dragon. No words of King Aenys could heal the wound. His brother's words thus opened, and many pious lords throughout the 7 kingdoms condemned the marriage, and began to speak openly of Maegor's whore. Vexed and angry, King Aenys gave his brother a choice: put Alice Hathaway aside and return to Lady Cerys, or suffer 5 years of exile. Prince Maegor chose exile. In 40 AC, he departed for Pentos, taking Lady Alice, Balerion, and the sword Blackfyre with him. It is said that Aenys requested that his brother return Blackfyre, to which Prince Maegor replied, "Your grace is welcome to try and take her from me." Lady Cerys was left abandoned in King's Landing. To replace his brother's hand, King Aenys turned to Septon Murmison, a pious cleric said to be able to heal the sick by the laying on of hands. The king had him lay hands on Lady Cerys' belly every night, in the hope that his brother might repent his folly, if his lawful wife could be made fertile. But the lady soon grew weary of the nightly ritual, and departed King's Landing for Old Town, where she rejoined her father in the High Tower. No doubt, His Grace the King hoped the choice would appease the faith. If so, he was wrong. Septon Murmison could no longer heal the realm. Then he could make Ceres Hightower fecund. The High Septon continued to thunder, and all through the realm, the lords in their halls spoke of the king's weakness. Can he rule the 7 kingdoms when he cannot even rule his brother? They said. That king remained oblivious to the discontent in the realm. Peace had returned. His troublesome brother was across the narrow sea, and a great new castle had begun to rise atop Aegon's high hill. Built all in pale red stone, the king's new seat would be larger and more lavish than Dragonstone, with massive walls and barbicans and towers capable of withstanding any enemy. The Red Keep, the people of King's Landing named it. Its building had become the king's obsession. My descendants shall rule from here for 1,000 years, His Grace declared, perhaps thinking of those descendants in 41 AC. Aenys Targaryen made a disastrous blunder, announcing his intention to give the hand of his daughter Rhaena in marriage to her brother Aegon, heir to the Iron Throne. The princess was 18, the prince 15. They had been close since childhood, playmates when young. Though Aegon had never claimed a dragon of his own, he had ascended into the skies more than once with his sister on Dreamfire. Lean and handsome and growing taller every year, Aegon was said by many to be the very image of his grandsire at the same age. 3 years of service as a squire had sharpened his prowess with sword and axe, and he was widely regarded as the best young lance in all the realm. Of late, many a young maiden had cast her eye upon the prince, and Aegon was not indifferent to their charms. If the prince is not wed, Grand Maester Gawain wrote the Citadel, His Grace may soon have a bastard grandchild to contend with. Princess Rhaena had many suitors as well, but unlike her brother, she gave encouragement to none of them. She preferred to spend her days with her siblings, her dogs and cats, and her newest favorite, Elaine Royce, daughter to the Lord of Runestone. A plump and homely girl, but so cherished that Rhaena sometimes took her flying on the back of Dreamfire, just as she did her brother Aegon. More often, though, Rhaena took to the skies by herself. After her 16th name day, the princess declared herself a woman grown, free to fly where I will. And fly she did. Dreamfire was seen as far away as Harrenhal, Tarth, Runestone, Gulltown. It was whispered, though never proved, that on one of these flights, Rhaena surrendered the flower of her maidenhead to a low-born lover. A hedge knight, one story had it. Others named him a singer, a blacksmith's son, a village septon. In light of these tales, some have suggested that Aenys might have felt a need to see his daughter wed as soon as possible. Regardless of the truth of that surmise, at 18, Rhaena was certainly of an age to marry. 3 years older than her mother and father had been when they were wed. Given the traditions and practices of House Targaryen, a match between his 2 eldest children must have seemed the obvious course to King Aenys. The affection between Rhaena and Aegon was well known, and neither raised any objection to the marriage. Indeed, there is much to suggest that both had been anticipating just such a partnership since they had first played together in the nurseries of Dragonstone and the Aegon Fort. The storm that greeted the king's announcement took them all by surprise, though the warning signs had been plain enough for those with the wit to read them. The faith had condoned, or at the very least, ignored the marriage of the conqueror and his sisters, but it was not willing to do the same for their grandchildren. From the Starry Sept came a blistering condemnation, denouncing the marriage of brother to sister as an obscenity. Any children born of such a union would be abominations in the sight of gods and men, the father of the faithful proclaimed in a declaration that was read by 10,000 septons throughout the 7 kingdoms. Aenys Targaryen was infamous for his indecision, yet here, faced with the fury of the faith, he stiffened and grew stubborn. The Dowager Queen Visenya advised him that he had but 2 choices. He must abandon the marriage and find new matches for his son and daughter, or mount his dragon Quicksilver to fly to Old Town, to burn the Starry Sept down around the High Septon's head. King Aenys did neither. Instead, he simply persisted. On the day of the wedding, the streets outside the Sept of Remembrance, built atop the hill of Rhaenys, and named in honor of the dragon's fallen queen, were lined with warriors' sons in gleaming silver armor, making note of each of the wedding guests as they passed by, foot or horse, or in litters. The wiser lords, perhaps expecting that, had stayed away. Those who did come to bear witness saw more than a wedding. The feast afterward, King Aenys compounded his misjudgment by granting the title Prince of Dragonstone to his presumptive heir, Prince Aegon. A hush fell over the hall at those words, for all present knew that title had hitherto belonged to Prince Maegor. At the high table, Queen Visenya rose and stalked from the hall without the king's permission. That night she mounted Vhagar and returned to Dragonstone, and it is written that when her dragon passed before the moon, that orb turned as red as blood. Aenys Targaryen did not seem to comprehend the extent to which he had roused the realm against him. Eager to win back the favor of the small folk, he decreed that the prince and princess would make a royal progress through the realm, no doubt thinking of the cheer that had greeted him everywhere he went on his own progress. Wiser perhaps than her father, Princess Rhaena, asked his leave to bring her dragon, Dreamfire, with them, but Aenys forbade. As Prince Aegon had not yet ridden a dragon, the king feared that the lords and commons might think his son unmanly if they saw his wife on dragonback, and him upon a palfrey. The king had grossly misjudged the temper of the kingdom, the piety of his people, and the power of the High Septon's words. From the first day they set out, Aegon and Rhaena and their escort were jeered by crowds of the faithful wherever they went. At Maidenpool, a single Septon could be found to pronounce a blessing at the feast Lord Mooten threw in their honor. When they reached Harrenhal, Lord Lucas Harroway refused to admit them to his castle unless they agreed to acknowledge his daughter, Alice, as their uncle's true and lawful wife. Their refusal won them no love from the pious, only a cold, wet night in tents beneath the towering walls of Black Harren's mighty castle. At one village in the Riverlands, several poor fellows went so far as were not able to do so. Prince Aegon drew his sword to chastise them, and had to be restrained by his own knights. But the prince's party was greatly outnumbered. Yet that did not stop Princess Rhaena from riding up to them to say, "You are fearless when facing a girl on a horse, I see. The next time I come, I will be on a dragon. Throw dirt on me then, I pray you." Elsewhere in the realm, matters went from bad to worse. Septon Murmison, the king's hand, was expelled from the faith in punishment for performing the forbidden nuptials, whereupon Aenys himself took quill in hand to write to the High Septon asking that his High Holiness restores my good Murmison, and explaining the long history of brother-sister marriages in old Valyria. The High Septon's reply was so venomous that his grace went pale when he read it. Far from relenting, the shepherd of the faithful addressed Aenys as King Abomination, calling him a pretender and a tyrant with no right to rule the Seven Kingdoms. The faithful were listening. Less than a fortnight later, as Septon Murmison was crossing the city in his litter, a group of poor fellows came swarming from an alley and hacked him to pieces with their axes. The warriors' sons began to fortify the hill of Rhaenys, turning the septs of remembrance into their citadel. With the Red Keep still years away from completion, the king decided that he was going to make plans to remove himself to Dragonstone with Queen Alyssa and their younger children. That proved a wise precaution. 3 days before they were to sail, 2 poor fellows scaled the manse's walls and broke into the king's bedchamber. Only the timely intervention of the king's guard saved Aenys from an ignoble death. His grace was trading Visenya's hill for Visenya herself. On Dragonstone, the Queen Dowager famously greeted him with, "You are a fool and a weakling, nephew. Do you think any man would ever have dared speak so to your father? You have a dragon. Use him. Fly to Old Town and make this starry sept another Harrenhal. Or give me leave and let me roast this pious fool for you." Aenys would not hear of it. Instead, he sent the Queen Dowager to her chambers in Sea Dragon Tower and ordered her to remain there. By the end of 41 AC, much of the realm was deep in the throes of a full-fledged rebellion against House Targaryen. The 4 false kings who had arisen on the death of Aegon the Conqueror now seemed like so many posturing fools against the threat posed by this new rising. For these rebels believed themselves soldiers of the Seven, fighting a holy war against godless tyranny. Dozens of pious lords throughout the Seven Kingdoms took out the cry, pulling down the king's banners and declaring for the Starry Sept. The warriors' sons seized the gates of King's Landing, giving them control over who might enter and leave the city, and drove the workmen from the unfinished Red Keep. Thousands of poor fellows took to the road, forcing travelers to declare whether they stood with the gods or the abomination, and remonstrated outside castle gates until their lords came forth to denounce the Targaryen king. In the Westerlands, Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaena were forced to abandon their progress and take shelter in Craighall Castle. An envoy from the Iron Bank of Bravos sent to Old Town to deal with Martin Hightower, the new lord of the High Tower and voice of Old Town. His father, Lord Manfred, having died a few moons earlier, wrote home to say that the High Septon was the true king of Westeros in all but name. King Aenys was still on Dragonstone, sick with fear and indecision. His grace was but 35 years of age, but it was said that he looked like a man of 60, and Grand Maester Gawain reported that he often took to his bed with loose bowels and stomach cramps. When none of the Grand Maester's cures proved efficacious, the Dowager Queen took charge of the king's care, and Aenys seemed to improve for a time, only to suffer a sudden collapse when word reached him that thousands of poor fellows had surrounded Craighall, where his son and daughter were reluctant guests. 3 days later, the king was dead. Like his father, Aenys Targaryen, the first of his name, was given over to the flames in the yard at Dragonstone. His funeral was attended by his sons, Viserys and Jaehaerys, 12 and 7 years of age respectively, and his daughter, Alysanne, 5. His widow, Queen Alyssa, sang a dirge for him, and his own beloved Quicksilver. Quicksilver set his pyre alight, though it was recorded that the dragons Vermithor and Silverwing added their own fire to hers. Queen Visenya was not present. Within an hour of the king's death, she had mounted Vhagar and flown east across the narrow sea. When she returned, Prince Maegor was with her, on Balerion. Maegor descended on Dragonstone, only long enough to claim the crown. Not the ornate gold. The golden crown Aenys had favored with its images of the Seven, but the iron crown of their father set with its blood-red rubies. His mother placed it on his head, and the lords and knights gathered and knelt as he proclaimed him Maegor of House Targaryen, first of his name, king of the Andals, the Rohoinar, and the first men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and protector of the realm. Only Grand Maester Gawain dared object. By all the laws of inheritance, laws that the conqueror himself had affirmed after the conquest, the Iron Throne should pass to King Aenys' son, Aegon. The aged Maester said, "The Iron Throne will go to the man who has the strength to seize it," Maegor replied. But he decreed the immediate execution of the Grand Maester, taking off Gawain's old grey head himself with a single swing of Blackfyre. Queen Alyssa and her children were not on hand. In order to witness King Maegor's coronation, she had taken them from Dragonstone within hours of her husband's funeral, crossing to her lord father's castle on nearby Driftmark. When told, Maegor gave a shrug, then retired to the chamber of the painted table, with a maester to dictate letters to lords great and small throughout the realm. 100 ravens flew within the day. The next day, Maegor flew as well. Mounting Balerion, he crossed Blackwater Bay to King's Landing, accompanied by the Dowager Queen Visenya upon Vhagar. The return of the dragons set off riots in the city, and hundreds tried to flee, only to find the gates closed and barred. The warriors' sons held the city walls, the pits and piles of what would be the Red Keep, and the hill of Rhaenys, where they had made the Sept of Remembrance, their own fortress. The Targaryens raised their standards atop Visenya's hill, and called for leal men to gather them. Thousands did Visenya Targaryen proclaim that her son Maegor had come to be their king. A true king, blood of Aegon the Conqueror, who was my brother, my husband, and my love. If any man questions my son's right to the Iron Throne, let him prove his claim with his body. The warrior's sons were not slow to accept her challenge. Down from the hill of Rhaenys, they rode 700 knights in silvered steel. led by their grand captain, Sir Daemon Morrigan, called Daemon the Devout. "Let us not bandy words," Maegor told him. "Swords will decide this matter." Sir Daemon agreed. "The gods would grant victory to the man whose cause was just," he said. "Let each side have 7 champions, as it was done in Andalos of old. Can you find 6 men to stand beside you?" For Aenys had taken the king's guard to Dragonstone, and Maegor stood alone. The king turned to the crowd. "Who will come and stand aside his king?" he called. Many turned away in fear, or pretended that they did not hear, for the prowess of the warriors' sons was known to all. But at last, one man offered himself, no knight, but a simple man-at-arms who called himself Dick Bean. "I've been a king's man since I was a boy," he said. "I mean, to die a king's man." Only then did the first knight step forward. "This Bean shames us all," he shouted. "Are there no true knights here, no leal men?" The speaker was Bernard Brune, the squire who had slain Harren the Red, and been knighted by King Aenys himself. His scorn drove others to offer their swords. The names of the 4 Maegor chose are writ large in the history of Westeros. Sir Bram of Blackhall, the Hedge Knight, Sir Rayford Rosby, Sir Guy Lothstan, called Gay the Glutton, and Sir Lucifer Massey, Lord of Stonedance. The names of the 7 warriors' sons have likewise come down to us. They were Sir Daemon Morrigan, called Daemon the Devout, Grand Captain of the warriors' sons, Sir Lyle Bracken, Sir Harris Hawke, called Deathhead Harry, Sir Aegon Ambrose, Sir Dickon Flowers, the Bastard of Beesbury, Sir Willem the Wanderer, and Sir Garibald of the 7 Stars, the Septon Knight. It is written that Daemon the Devout led a prayer beseeching the warrior to grant strength to their arms. Afterward, the Queen Dowager gave the command to begin, and the issue was joined. Dick Bean died first, cut down by Lyle Bracken mere instants after the combat began. Thereafter, accounts differ markedly. One chronicler says that when the hugely fat Sir Guy, the glutton, was cut open, the remains of 40 half-digested pies spilled out. Another claims that Sir Garibald of the 7 Stars sang a paean as he fought. Several tell us that Lord Massey hacked off the arm of Harry Hawke. In one account, Deathhead Harry tossed his battle-axe into his other hand and buried it between Lord Massey's eyes. Other chroniclers suggest Sir Harris simply died. Some say the fight went on for hours. Others that most of the combatants were down and dying in mere moments. All agree the great deeds were done, and mighty blows exchanged until the end found Maegor Targaryen standing alone against Daemon the Devout and Willem the Wanderer. Both of the warrior's sons were badly wounded, and his grace had Blackfyre in his hand. But even so, it was a near thing. Even as he fell, Sir Willem dealt the king a terrible blow to the head that cracked his helm and left him insensate. Many thought Maegor was dead, until his mother removed his broken helm. The king breathed, she said. The king lives. The victory was his. 7 of the mightiest of the warriors' sons were dead, including their commander. But more than 700 remained, armed and armored, and gathered about the crown of the hill. Queen commanded her son be taken. As the litter-bearers bore him down the hill, the swords of the faith dropped to their knees in submission. The Dowager Queen ordered them to return to their fortified sept atop the hill of Rhaenys. For 27 days, Maegor Targaryen lingered at the point of death, whilst maesters treated him with potions and poultices, and septons prayed above his bed. In the sept of remembrance, the warriors' sons prayed as well, and argued about their cause. Some felt the order had no choice but to accept Maegor as king, since the gods had blessed him with victory. Others insisted that they were bound by oath to obey the High Septon and fight on. The king's guard arrived from Dragonstone in the nonce. At the behest of the Dowager Queen, they took command of the thousands of Targaryen loyalists in the city and surrounded the hill of Rhaenys. On Driftmark, the widowed Queen Alyssa proclaimed her own son Aegon the true king, but few heeded her call. The young prince, just shy of manhood, remained at Crake Hall, half a realm away. Abandoning their royal progress, They made their way to Casterly Rock, where Lord Wyman Lannister offered them his protection. It was his wife, Lady Ducaster, who first discerned that Princess Rhaena was with child, Lord Wyman's master tells us today. On the 28th day after the trial of 7, a ship arrived from Pentos upon the evening tide, carrying 2 women and 600 sellswords. Alice of House Harroway, Maegor Targaryen's second wife, had returned to Westeros, but not alone. With her sailed another woman, a pale, raven-haired beauty known only as Tiana of Pentos. Some said the woman was Maegor's concubine. Others named her Lady Alice's paramour, the natural daughter of a Pentoshi magister. Tiana was a tavern dancer who had risen to be a courtesan. She was rumored to be a poisoner and sorceress as well. Many queer tales were told about her. Yet as soon as she arrived, Queen Visenya dismissed her son's masters and septons and gave Maegor over to Tiana's care. The next morning the king awoke, rising with the sun. When Maegor appeared on the walls of the Red Keep, standing between Alice Harroway and Tiana of Pentos, the crowds cheered wildly, and the city erupted in celebration. But the rebels died away when Maegor mounted Balerion and descended upon the hill of Rhaenys, where 700 of the warriors' sons were at their morning prayers in the fortified sept. As dragonfire set the building aflame, archers and spearmen waited outside for those who came bursting through the doors. It was said the screams of the burning men could be heard throughout the city, and a pall of smoke lingered over King's Landing for days. Thus did the scream of the warriors' sons meet their fiery end. Though other chapters remained in Old Town, Lannisport, Gulltown, and Stony Sept, the Order would never again approach its former strength. King Maegor's war against the Faith militant had just begun. However, it would continue for the remainder of his reign. The king's first act upon ascending the Iron Throne was to command the poor fellows, swarming toward the city, to lay down their weapons under penalty of proscription and death. When his decree had no effect, His Grace commanded all leal lords to take the field against the Faith's ragged hordes by force. In response, the High Septon in Old Town called upon true and pious children of the gods to take up arms in defense of the Faith and put an end to the reign of dragons and monsters and abominations. Battle was joined first in the reach of the town of Stonebridge. There, 9,000 poor fellows under Wat the Hewer found themselves caught between 6 lordly hosts as they attempted to cross the Manda. With half his men north of the river and half on the south, Wat's army was cut to pieces. His untrained and undisciplined followers clad in boiled leather, rough spun and scraps of rusted steel, and armed largely with woodsmen's axes and sharpened stakes and farm implements, proved utterly unable to stand against the charge of armored knights on heavy horses. Sobus was the slaughter that the Manda ran red for 20 leagues. And thereafter, the town and castle where the battle had been fought became known as Bitterbridge. Wat himself was taken alive, though not before slaying half a dozen knights, amongst them Lord Meadows of Grassy Vale, commander of the king's host. The defiant giant was delivered to King's Landing in chains. By then, Sir Horace Hill had reached the great fork of the Blackwater with an even larger host, close on 13,000 poor fellows, their ranks stiffened by the addition of 200 mounted warrior sons from Stony Sept, and the household knights and feudal levers of a dozen rebel lords from the Westlands and Riverlands. Lord Rupert Falwell, famed as the Fighting Fool, led the ranks of the pious who had answered the High Septon's call. With him rode Sir Lionel Larch, Sir Alan Tarrick, Lord Christopher Wayne, Lord John Lester, and many other puissant knights. The army of the faithful numbered 20,000 men. King Maegor's army was of like size, however, and his Grace had almost twice as much armored horse, as well as a large contingent of longbowmen and the king himself riding Balerion. Even so, the battle proved a savage struggle. The Fighting Fool slew 2 knights of the king's guard before he himself was cut down by the Lord of Maidenpool. Big John Hogg, fighting for the king, was blinded by a sword slash early in the battle, yet rallied his men and led a charge that broke through the lines of the faithful and put the poor fellows to flight. A rainstorm dampened Balerion's fires, but could not quench them entirely, and amidst smoke and screams, King Maegor descended again and again to serve his foes with flame. By nightfall, victory was his, as the remaining poor fellows threw down their axes and streamed away in all directions. Triumphant, Maegor returned to King's Landing to seat himself once more upon the Iron Throne. When Wat the Hewer was delivered to him, chained yet still defiant, Maegor took off his limbs with the giant's own axe, but commanded his masters to keep the man alive, so he might attend my wedding. Then his grace announced his intent to take Tiana of Pentos as his third wife. His mother, the Queen Dowager, had no love for the Pentoshi sorceress. Only Grand Master Miros dared speak against her openly. "Your one true wife awaits you in the High Tower," Miros said. The king heard him out in silence, then descended from the throne, drew Blackfyre, and slew him where he stood. Maegor Targaryen and Tiana of Pentos were wed atop the hill of Aenys, amidst the ashes and bones of the warriors' sons who had died there. It was said that Maegor had to put 12 septons to death before he found one willing to perform the ceremony. Wat the Hewer limbless was kept alive to witness the marriage. King Aenys' widow, Queen Alyssa, was present as well, with her younger sons, Viserys and Jaehaerys, and her daughter, Alysanne. A visit from the Dowager Queen in Vhagar had persuaded her to leave her sanctuary on Driftmark and return to court, where Alyssa and her brothers and cousins of House Balerion did homage to Maegor as the true king. The widowed queen was even compelled to join the other ladies of the court in disrobing his grace and escorting him to the nuptial chamber to consummate his marriage. A bedding ceremony presided over by the king's second wife, Alice Harroway. That task done, Alyssa and the other ladies took their leave of the royal bedchamber, but Alice remained, joining the king and his newest wife in a night of carnal lust. Across the realm in Old Town, the High Septon was loud in his denunciations of the abomination and his whores, whilst the king's first wife, Cersei of House Hightower, continued to insist that she was Maegor's only lawful queen. And in the Westerlands, Aegon Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, and his wife, Princess Rhaena, remained defiant as well. All through the turmoil of Maegor's ascension, King Aenys' son and the princess his wife had remained at Casterly Rock, where Rhaena grew great with child. Most of the knights and young lordlings who had set out with them on their ill-fated progress had abandoned them, rushing off to King's Landing to bend their knees to Maegor. Even Rhaena's handmaids and companions had found excuses to absent themselves, save for her friend Alan Royce and a former favorite, Melanie Piper, who arrived at Lannisport with her brothers to swear the loyalty of their house. All his life, Prince Aegon had been considered the heir presumptive to the Iron Throne. But now, suddenly, he found himself reviled by the pious and abandoned by many he had thought to be his leal friends. Maegor's supporters, who seemed more numerous every day, were not shy in saying that Aegon was his father's son, suggesting that they saw in him the same weakness that had brought down King Aenys. Aegon had never ridden a dragon, they pointed out, whereas Maegor had claimed Balerion and the prince's own bride, Princess Rhaena, had been flying Dreamfire since the age of 12. Queen Alyssa's attendance at Maegor's wedding was trumpeted as proof that Aegon's own mother had abandoned his cause. Though Lyman Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, stood firm when Maegor demanded that Aegon and his sister be returned to King's Landing. Aegon in chains, if need be, even he would not go so far as to pledge his sword to the youth, who now found himself being called the Pretender, and Aegon the Uncrowned. And thus, it was there at Casterly Rock that Princess Rhaena gave birth to Aegon's daughters. Twins they named Arya and Rhaella, from the Starry. As the red stone towers rose, the king commanded the building of a castle within the castle, a fortified redoubt surrounded by a dry moat that would soon be known to all as Maegor's Holdfast. In that same year, Maegor made Lord Lucas Harroway, father of his wife, Queen Alice, his new hand. But it was not the hand who had the king's ear. His grace might rule the 7 kingdoms, men whispered, but he himself was ruled by the 3 queens. His mother, Queen Visenya, his paramour, Queen Alice, and the Pentoshi witch, Queen Tiana, the mistress of whispers, Tiana was called. and the king's raven for her black hair. She spoke with rats and spiders, it was said, and all the vermin of King's Landing came to her by night to tell tales of any fool, a fool rash enough to speak against the king. Meanwhile, thousands of poor fellows still haunted the roads and wild places of the Reach, the Trident, and the Vale, though they would never again assemble in large numbers to face the king in open battle. The stars fought on in smaller ways, falling upon travelers and swarming over towns, villages, and poorly defended castles, slaying the king's loyalists wherever they found them. Sir Horace Hill had escaped the battle at Great Fork, but defeat and flight had tarnished him, and his followers were few. The new leaders of the poor fellows were men like Ragged Silas, Septon Moon, and Dennis the Lame, hardly distinguishable from outlaws. One of their most vicious captains was a woman called Poxy Jane Poor, whose savage followers made the woods between King's Landing and Storm's End all but impassable to honest travelers. Meanwhile, the warriors' sons had chosen a new grand plan, and they were led by the great captain in the person of Sir Joffrey Doggett, the Red Dog of the Hills, who was determined to restore the order to its former glory. When Sir Joffrey set out from Lannisport to seek the blessing of the High Septon, 100 men rode with him. By the time he arrived in Old Town, so many knights and squires and free riders had joined him that his numbers had swollen to 2,000. Elsewhere in the realm, other restless lords and men of faith were gathering men as well, and plotting ways to bring the dragon down. None of this had gone unnoticed. Ravens flew to every corner of the realm, summoning lords and landed knights of doubtful loyalty to King's Landing to bend the knee, swear homage, and deliver a son or daughter as a hostage for their obedience. The stars and swords were outlawed. Membership in either order would henceforth be punishable by death. The High Septon was commanded to deliver himself to the Red Keep, to stand trial for high treason. His High Holiness responded from the Starry Sept, commanding the king to present himself in Old Town to beg the forgiveness of the gods for his sins and cruelties. Many of the faithful echoed his defiance. Some pious lords did travel to King's Landing to do homage and present hostages, but more did not, trusting to their numbers and the strength of their castles to keep them safe. King Maegor led the poisons fester for almost half a year, so engrossed was he in the building of his Red Keep. It was his mother who struck first. The Dowager Queen mounted Vhagar and brought fire and blood to the Riverlands, as she had done to Dorne during the Dornish War. In a single night, the seats of House Blaintree, House Terrick, House Deddings, House Lichester, and House Wayne were set aflame. Then, Maegor himself took wing, flying Balerion to the Westerlands, where he burned the castles of the Brooms, the Folwells, the Lorches, and the other pious lords who had defied his summons. Lastly, he descended upon the seat of House Doggett, reducing it to ash. The fires claimed the lives of Sir Joffrey's father, mother, and young sister, along with their sworn swords, serving men and chattel. As pillars of smoke rose all through the Westerlands and the Riverlands, Vhagar and Balerion turned south. Another Lord Hightower, counseled by another High Septon, had opened the gates of Old Town during the conquest. But now it seemed as if the greatest and most populous city in Westeros must surely burn. Thousands fled Old Town that night, streaming from the city gates or taking ship for distant ports. Thousands more took to the streets in drunken revelry. This is a night for song and sin and drink, men told one another. For come tomorrow, the virtuous and the vile burn together. Others gathered in septs and temples and ancient woods to pray they might be spared. In the Starry Sept, the High Septon railed and thundered, calling down the wrath of the gods upon the Targaryen. The arch-masters of the citadel met in conclave. The men of the city watch filled sacks with sand and pails with water to fight the fires they knew were coming. Along the city walls, crossbows, scorpions, spitfires, and spear throwers were hoisted onto the battlements, in hopes of bringing down the dragons when they appeared. Led by Sir Morgan Hightower, a younger brother of the Lord of Old Town, 200 warriors' sons spilled forth from their chapter house to defend his High Holiness, surrounding the Starry Sept with a ring of steel. Atop the high tower, the great beacon fire turned a baleful green, as Lord Martin Hightower called his banners. Old Town waited for the dawn, and the coming of the dragons. And the dragons came. Vhagar first, as the sun was rising, then Balerion just before midday. But they found the gates of the citadel, the city open, the battlements unmanned, and the banners of House Targaryen, House Tyrell, and House Hightower flying side by side atop the city walls. The Dowager, Queen Visenya, was the first to learn the news. Sometime during the blackest hour of that long and dreadful night, the High Septon had died. A man of 53, as tireless as he was fearless, and to all appearances in robust good health. This High Septon had been renowned for his strength. More than once, he had preached for a day and a night, without taking sleep or nourishment. His sudden death shocked the city and dismayed his followers. Its causes are debated to this day. Some say that His High Holiness took his own life, in what was either the act of a craven afraid to face the wrath of King Maegor, or a noble sacrifice to spare the good folk of Old Town from dragonfire. Others claim, and the Sevens struck him down for the sin of pride, for heresy, treason, and arrogance. Many and more remain certain he was murdered, but by who? Sir Morgan Hightower did the deed at the command of his lord brother, some say, and Sir Morgan was seen entering and leaving the High Septon's privy chambers that night. Others point to the Lady Patrice Hightower, Lord Martin's maiden aunt and a reputed witch, who did indeed seek an audience with His High Holiness at dusk, though he was alive when she departed. The archmaesters of the citadel are also suspected, though whether they made use of the dark arts, an assassin, or a poisoned scroll is still a matter of debate till today. Messages went back and forth between the citadel and the Starry Sept all night, and there are still others who hold them all blameless, and lay the High Septon's death at the door of another rumored sorceress, the Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen. The truth will likely never be known, but the swift reaction of Lord Martin when word reached him at the High Tower is beyond dispute. At once he dispatched his own knights to disarm and arrest the warriors' sons, amongst them his own brother. The city gates were opened, and Targaryen banners raised along the walls. Even before Vhagar's wings were sighted, Lord Hightower's men were rousting the most devout from their beds, and marching them to the Starry Sept at slow speed, spear point, to choose a new High Septon. It required, at a single ballot, almost as one, the wise men and women of the faith turned to a certain Septon Pater, 90 years old, blind, stooped and feeble, but famously amiable. The new High Septon almost collapsed beneath the weight of the crystal crown when it was placed upon his head. But when Maegor Targaryen appeared before him in the Starry Sept, he was only too pleased to bless him as king and anoint his head with holy oils, even if he did forget the words of the blessing. Queen Visenya soon returned to Dragonstone with Vhagar, but King Maegor remained in Old Town for almost half the year, holding court and presiding over trials. To the captive swords of the warriors' sons, a choice was given. Those who renounced their allegiance to the Order would be permitted to travel to the High Septon and live out their days as brothers of the Night's Watch. Those who refused could die as martyrs to their faith. 3/4 of the captives chose to take the black. The remainder died. 7 of their number, famous knights and the sons of lords, were given the honor of having King Maegor himself remove their heads with black fire. The rest of the condemned were beheaded by their own former brothers-in-arms. Of all their number, only one man received the honor of the full royal pardon, Sir Morgan Hightower. The new High Septon formally dissolved both the warriors' sons and the poor fellows, commanding their remaining members to lay down their arms in the name of the gods. The 7 had no more need of warriors, proclaimed His High Holiness. Henceforth the Iron Throne would protect and defend the faith. King Maegor granted the surviving members of the faith militant, till year's end, to surrender their weapons and give up their rebellious ways. After that, those who remained defiant would find a bounty on their heads. A gold dragon for the head of any unrepentant warrior's son. A silver stag for the lice-ridden scalp of a poor fellow. The new High Septon did not demur, nor did the most devout. During his time at Old Town, the king was also reconciled with his first wife, Queen Ceres, the sister of his host, Lord Hightower. Her Grace agreed to accept the king's other wives, to treat them with respect and honor, and speak no further ill against them, whilst Maegor swore to restore to Ceres all the rights, incomes, and privileges due her as his wedded wife and queen. A great feast was held at the High Tower to celebrate their reconciliation. The revels even included a bedding and a second consummation, so all men would know this to be a true and loving union. How long King Maegor might have lingered at Old Town cannot be known, for in the latter part of 43 AC, another challenge to his throne arose. His Grace's long absence from King's Landing had not gone unnoticed by his nephew, and Prince Aegon was quick to seize his chance. Emerging at last from Casterly Rock, Aegon the Uncrowned and his wife Rhaena raced across the riverlands with a handful of companions and entered the city, concealed beneath sacks of corn. With so few followers, Aegon dared not seat himself upon the Iron Throne, for he knew he could not hold it. They were there for Rhaena's dream fire, and so the prince might claim his father's dragon, Quicksilver. In this bold endeavor, they were aided by friends in Maegor's own court, who had grown weary of the king's cruelties. The prince and princess entered King's Landing in a wagon pulled by mules, but when they made their departure, it was on Dragonback, flying side by side. From there, Aegon and Rhaena returned to the Westerlands to assemble an army. As the Lannisters of Casterly Rock were still reluctant to openly espouse Prince Aegon's cause, his adherents gathered at Pink Maiden Castle, seat of House Piper. John Piper, Lord of Pink Maiden, had pledged his sword to the prince, but it was widely believed that it was his fiery sister Melanie, Rhaena's girlhood friend, who won him to the cause. It was there at Pink Maiden that Aegon Targaryen, mounted on Quicksilver, descended from the sky to denounce his uncle as a tyrant and usurper, and call upon all honest men to rally to his banners. The lords and knights who came were largely western men and river lords. The lords Tarbeck, Root, Vance, Charlton, Frey, Page, Perrin, Farman, and Westerling were amongst them, together with Lord Corbray of the Vale, the bastard of Barrington, and the fourth son of the Lord of Griffin's Roost. From Lannisport came 500 men under the banner of a bastard son of Lyman Lannister, Sir Tyler Hill of Casterly Rock, lent supporters to the young prince, while still keeping his own hands clean should Maegor prevail. The Piper Leavers were led not by Lord John or his brothers, but by their sister Melanie, who donned man's mail and took up a spear. 15,000 men had joined the rebellion, as Aegon the Uncrowned began his march across the riverlands to stake his claim to the Iron Throne, led by the prince himself on King Aenys's beloved dragon Quicksilver. Though their ranks included seasoned commanders and puissant knights, no great lords had rallied to Prince Aegon's cause. But Queen Tiana, Mistress of Whisperers, wrote to warn Maegor that storms end. The Eyrie, Winterfell, and Casterly Rock had all been in secret communication with his brother's widowed queen, Alyssa. Before declaring for the Prince of Dragonstone, they wished to be convinced he might prevail. Prince Aegon required a victory, Maegor denied him that. From Harrenhal came forth Lord Harroway, from Riverrun, Lord Tully. Sir Davos Darklyn of the King's Guard marshaled 5,000 swords in King's Landing and struck out west to meet the rebels. Up from the Reach came Lord Peake, Lord Merryweather, Lord Caswell, and their levies. Prince Aegon's slow-moving host found armies closing from all sides, each smaller than their own force, but so many that the young prince, still but 17, did not know where to turn. Lord Corbray advised him to engage each foe separately before they could join their powers, but Aegon was loath to divide his strength. Instead, he chose to march on toward King's Landing, just south of the God's Eye. He found Davos Darklyn's King's Landers athwart his path, sitting on high ground behind a wall of spears, even as scouts reported Lords Merryweather and Caswell advancing from the south and Lords Tully and Harroway from the north. Prince Aegon commanded a charge, hoping to break through the King's Landers before the other loyalists fell upon his flanks, and mounted Quicksilver to lead the attack himself. But scarce had he taken wing when he heard shouts and saw his men below. pointing to where Balerion, the Black Dread, had appeared in the southern sky. King Maegor had come. For the first time since the doom of Valyria, dragon contended with dragon in the sky, even as battle was joined below. Quicksilver, a quarter the size of Balerion, was no match for the older, fiercer dragon, and her pale white fireballs were engulfed and washed in great gouts of black flame. Then the Black Dread fell upon her from above, his jaws closing round her neck as he ripped one wing from her body, screaming and smoking. The young dragon plunged to earth, and Prince Aegon with her. The battle below was nigh as brief, if bloodier. Once Aegon fell, the rebels saw their cause was doomed and ran, discarding arms and armor as they fled. But the loyalist armies were all defeated. They were all around them, and there was no escape. By day's end, 2,000 of Aegon's men had died against 100 of the kings. Amongst the dead were Lord Alan Tarbeck, Dennis Snow, the bastard of Barrington, Lord Ronald Vance, Sir William Whistler, Melanie Piper, and 3 of her brothers, and the Prince of Dragonstone, Aegon the Uncrowned of House Targaryen. The only notable loss amongst the loyalists was Sir Davos Starklin of the Kingsguard, slain at the hands of Lord Corbray with Lady Forlorn. Half a year of trials and executions followed. Queen Visenya persuaded her son to spare some of the rebellious lords, but even those who kept their lives lost lands and titles and were forced to give up hostages. One notable name could be found neither amongst the dead nor the captive. Rhaena Targaryen, sister and wife to Prince Aegon, had not joined the host. Whether that was by his command or her own choice is still debated to this day. All that is known for certain is that Rhaena remained at Pink Maiden Castle with her daughters when Aegon marched, and with her, Dreamfire. Would the addition of a second dragon to the prince's host have made a difference when battle was joined? We shall never know, though it has been pointed out rightly that Princess Rhaena was no warrior, and Dreamfire was younger and smaller than Quicksilver, and certainly no true threat to Balerion, the Black Dread. When word of the battle reached the west, and Princess Rhaena learned that both her husband and her friend, Lady Melanie, had fallen, it is said she heard the news in a stony silence. "Will you not weep?" she was asked, to which she replied, "I do not have the time for tears." Whereupon, fearing her uncle's wrath, she gathered up her daughters, Arya and Rhaella, and fled farther, first to Lannisport, and then across the sea to Fair Isle, where the new lord, Mark Farman, whose father and elder brother had both perished in battle fighting for Prince Aegon, gave her sanctuary, and swore no harm would come to her beneath his roof. For the best part of a year, the people of Fair Isle watched the east in dread, fearing the sight of Balerion's dark wings. But Maegor never came. Instead, the victorious king returned to the Red Keep, where he grimly set about getting himself an heir. The 44th year after the conquest was a peaceful one, compared to what had gone before. But the maesters who chronicled those times wrote that the smell of blood and fire still hung heavy in the air. Maegor I Targaryen sat the Iron Throne as his Red Keep rose around him, but his court was grim and cheerless, despite the presence of his 3 queens, or perhaps because of it. Each night he summoned one of his wives to his bed, yet still he remained childless, with no heir but for the sons and daughters of his brother Aenys. Maegor the Cruel, he was called, and Kinslayer as well, though it was death to say either in his hearing. In Old Town, the ancient High Septon died, and another was raised up in his place, though he spoke no word against the king or his queens. The enmity between King Maegor and the Fairy, his faith endured. Hundreds of poor fellows had been hunted down and slain, their scalps delivered to the king's men for the bounty. Thousands more still roamed the woods and hedges and the wild places of the 7 kingdoms, cursing the Targaryens with their every breath. One band even crowned their own High Septon in the person of a bearded brute named Septon Moon. And a few warriors' sons still endured, led by Sir Joffrey Doggett, the Red Dog of the Hills. Outlawed and condemned, the Order no longer had the strength to meet the king's men in open battle. So the Red Dog sent them out in the guise of hedge knights to hunt and slay Targaryen loyalists and traitors to the faith. Their first victim was Sir Morgan Hightower, late of their order, cut down and butchered on the road to Honeyholt. Old Lord Merryweather was the next to die, followed by Lord Peake's son and heir, Davos Darklin's aged father, even blind John Hogg. Though the bounty for the head of a warrior's son was a golden dragon, the small folk and peasants of the realm hid and protected them, remembering what they had been. On Dragonstone, the Dowager Queen Visenya had grown thin and haggard, the flesh melting from her bones. Queen Alyssa remained on the island as well, with her son Jaehaerys and her daughter Alysanne, prisoners in all but name. Prince Viserys, the eldest surviving son of Aenys and Alyssa, was summoned to court by his grace. A promising lad of 15 years, beloved of the commons, Viserys was made squire to the king, with a Kingsguard knight for a shadow, to keep him well away from plots and treasons. For a brief while in 44 AC, it seemed as if the king might soon have that son he desired so desperately. Queen Alice announced she was with child, and the court rejoiced. Grand Maester Desmond confined her grace to her bed as she grew great with child. Maegor insisted that his other wives serve his pregnant queen as well. During the third moon of her confinement, however, Lady Alice began to bleed heavily from the womb and lost the child. When King Maegor came to see the stillbirth, he was horrified to find the boy a monster with twisted limbs, a huge head, and no eyes. "This cannot be my son," he roared in anguish. Then his grief turned to fury, and he ordered the immediate execution of the midwife and scepters who had charge of the queen's care, and Grand Maester Desmond as well, sparing only Alice's sisters. It is said that Maegor was seated on the Iron Throne with the head of the Grand Maester in his hands, and Queen Tiana came to tell him he had been deceived. The child was not his seed. Seeing Queen Cerise return to court, old and bitter and childless, Alice Haraway had begun to fear that the same fate awaited her unless she gave the king a son. So she had turned to her Lord Father, the hand of the king. On the nights when the king was sharing a bed with Queen Cerise or Queen Tiana, Lucas Haraway sent men to his daughter's bed to get her with child. Maegor refused to believe. He told Tiana she was a jealous witch and barren, throwing the Grand Maester's head at her. "Do not lie," the mistress of the Whisperers replied. She handed the king a list. Written there were the names of 20 men alleged to have given their seed to Queen Alice. Old men and young handsome men and homely ones, knights and squires, lords and servants, even grooms and smiths and singers. The king's hand had cast a wide net, it seemed. The men had only one thing in common. All were men of proven power. All were men of proven potency, known to have fathered healthy children. Under torture, all but 2 confessed. One, a father of 12, still had the gold paid him by Lord Haraway for his services. The questioning was carried out swiftly and secretly, so Lord Haraway and Queen Alice had no inkling of the king's suspicions until the king's guard burst in on them. Dragged from her bed, Queen Alice saw her sisters killed before her eyes as they tried to protect her. Her father, inspecting the tower of the king, a hand was flung from its roof to smash upon the stones below. Haraway's sons, brothers, and nephews were taken as well, thrown onto the spikes that lined the dry moat around Maegor's holdfast. Some took hours to die. The simple-minded Horace Haraway lingered for days. The 20 names on Queen Tiana's list soon joined them, and then another dozen men named by the first 20. The worst death was reserved for Queen Alice herself, who was given over to her sister wife, Tiana, for torment. Maegor's reign is marked by death, destruction, and paranoia, as evidenced by the gruesome fates of Queen Alyssa, House Haraway, Prince Viserys, the Red Keep's builders, and Queen Cersei. Of her death we will not speak, for some things are best buried and forgotten. Suffice it to say that her dying took the best part of a fortnight, and that Maegor himself was present for all of it, a witness to her agony. After her death, the queen's body was cut into 7 parts, and her pieces mounted on spikes above the 7 gates of the city, where they remained, until they rotted. King Maegor himself departed King's Landing, assembling a strong force of knights and men-at-arms, and marching on Harrenhal to complete the destruction of House Harroway. The great castle on the God's Eye was lightly held, and his castellan, a nephew of Lord Lucas, and cousin to the late Queen, opened his gates at the king's approach. Surrender did not save him. His Grace put the entire garrison to the sword, along with every man, woman, and child he found to have any drop of Harroway blood. Then he marched to Lord Harroway's town on the Trident, and did the same there. In the aftermath of the bloodletting, men began to say that Harrenhal was cursed, for every lordly house to hold it had come to a bad and bloody end. Nonetheless, many ambitious king's men coveted Black Harren's mighty seat with his broad and fertile lands, so many that King Maegor grew weary of their entreaties, and decreed that Harrenhal should go to the strongest of them. Thus did 23 knights of the king's household fight with sword and mace and lance amidst the blood-soaked streets of Lord Harroway's town. Sir Walton Towers emerged victorious, and Maegor named him Lord of Harrenhal. But the melee had been a savage affair, and Sir Walton did not live long enough to enjoy his lordship, dying of his wounds within the fortnight. Harrenhal passed to his eldest son, though its domains were much diminished, as the king granted Lord Harroway's town to Lord Alton Butterwell, and the rest of the Harroway holdings to Lord Donald Dane. When at last Maegor returned to King's Landing to seat himself again upon the Iron Throne, he was greeted with news that his mother, Queen Visenya, had died. Moreover, in the confusion that followed the death of the Queen Dowager, Queen Alyssa and her children had made their escape from Dragonstone, with the dragons Vermithor and Silverwing to where no man could say. They had even gone so far as to steal Dark Sister as they fled. His Grace ordered his mother's body burned, her bones and ashes interred beside those of the Conqueror. Then he sent his king's guard to seize his squire, Prince Viserys. "Chain him in a black cell and question him sharply," Maegor commanded. "Ask him where his mother has gone." "He may not know," protested Sir Owen Bush, a knight of Maegor's king's guard. "Then let him die," the king answered famously. "Perhaps the bitch will turn up for his funeral." Prince Viserys did not know where his mother had gone, not even when Tiana of Pentos plied him with her dark arts. After 9 days of questioning, he died. His body was left out in the ward of the Red Keep for a fortnight at the king's command. "Let his mother come and claim him," Maegor said. But Queen Alyssa never appeared, and at last his Grace consigned his nephew to the fire. The prince was 15 years old when he was killed, and had been much loved by small folk and lords alike. The realm wept for him. In 45 AC, construction finally came to an end on the Red Keep. King Maegor celebrated its completion by feasting the builders and workmen who had labored on the castle, sending them wagon loads of strong wine and sweetmeats, and whores from the city's finest brothels. The revels lasted for 3 days. Afterward, the king's knights moved in and put all the workmen to the sword, to prevent them from ever revealing the Red Keep's secrets. Their bones were interred beneath the castle that they had built. Not long after the completion of the castle, Queen Cersei was stricken with a sudden illness and passed away. A rumor went around the court that her Grace had given offense to the king with a shrewish remark, so he had commanded Sir Owen to remove her tongue. As the tale went, the queen had struggled. Sir Owen's knife had slipped, and the queen's throat had been slit. Although never proven, this story was widely believed at the time. Today, however, most meisters believe it to be a slander concocted by the king's enemies, to further blacken his reputation. Whatever the truth, the death of his first wife left Maegor with but a single queen, a black-haired, black-hearted Pentosi woman, Tiana, mistress of the spiders, who was hated and feared by all. Oddly, the last stone being set on the Red Keep, when Maegor commanded that the ruins of the Sept of Remembrance be cleared from the top of Rhaenys' hill, and with them, the bones and ashes of the warriors' sons who had perished there. King Maegor's reign is marked by the construction of the Dragon Pit, brutal suppression of dissent, and the search for an heir through multiple marriages. In that place, he decreed a great stone stable for dragons would be erected, a lair worthy of Balerion, Vhagar, and their Get. Thus commenced the building of the dragon pit. Not unsurprisingly, it proved difficult to find builders, stonemasons, and laborers to work on the project. So many men ran off that the king was finally forced to use prisoners from the city's dungeons as his workforce under the supervision of builders brought in from Myr and Volantis. Late in the year 45 AC, King Maegor took the field once again to continue his war against the outlawed remnants of the Faith Militant, leaving Queen Tiana to rule King's Landing together with a new hand, Lord Edwil Celtigar. In the Great Wood, south of the Blackwater, the king's forces hunted down scores of poor fellows who had taken refuge there, sending many to the wall and hanging those who refused to take the black. Their leader, the woman known as Poxy Jane, continued to elude the king until at last she was betrayed by 3 of her own followers, who received pardons and knighthoods as their reward. 3 septons traveling with his grace declared Poxy Jane a witch, and Maegor ordered her to be burned alive in a field beside the Windwater. When the day appointed for her execution came, 300 of her followers, poor fellows and peasants all, burst from the woods to rescue her. The king had anticipated this, however, and his men were ready for the attack. The rescuers were surrounded and slaughtered. Amongst the last to die was their leader, who proved to be Sir Horace Hill, the bastard hedge knight who had escaped the carnage of the Great Fork 3 years earlier. This time, he proved less fortunate. Elsewhere in the realm, however, the tide of the times had begun to turn against the king. Small folk and lords alike had come to despise him for his many cruelties, and many began to give help and comfort to his enemies. Septon Moon, the high septon raised up by the poor fellows against the man in Old Town they called the High Lickspittle, roamed the riverlands and reached at will, drawing huge crowds whenever he emerged from the woods to preach against the king. The hill country north of the Golden Tooth was ruled in all but name by the Red Dog, Sir Joffrey Doggett, self-proclaimed Grand Captain of the Warriors' Sons. Neither Casterly Rock nor River Run seemed inclined to move against him. Dennis the Lame and Ragged Silas remained at large, and wherever they roamed, small folk helped keep them safe. Knights and men-at-arms, sent out to bring them to justice, oft vanished. In 46 AC, King Maegor returned to the Red Keep with 2,000 skulls, the fruits of a year of campaigning. They were the heads of poor fellows and warrior sons, he announced, as he dumped them out beneath the Iron Throne. But it was widely believed that many of the grisly trophies belonged to simple crofters, field hands and swineherds, guilty of no crime but faith. The coming of the new year found Maegor still without a son, not even a bastard who might be legitimized. Nor did it seem likely that Queen Tiana would give him the heir that he desired. While she continued to serve his grace as mistress of whisperers, the king no longer sought her bed. It was past time for him to take a new wife. Maegor's counselors agreed, but they parted ways on who that wife should be. Grandmaster Bennifer suggested a match with a proud and lovely lady of Starfall, Clarisse Dane, in the hopes of detaching her lands and house from Dorne. Alton Butterwell, Master of Coin, offered his widowed sister, a stout woman with 7 children. Though admittedly no beauty, he argued, her fertility had been proved beyond a doubt. The king's hand, Lord Celtigar, had 2 young maiden daughters, 13 and 12 years of age, respectively. He urged the king to take his pick of them, or marry both if he preferred. Lord Balerion of Driftmark advised Maegor to send for his niece, Rhaena, the widow of Aegon the Uncrowned. By taking her to wife, Maegor could unite their claims, prevent any fresh rebellions from gathering around her, and acquire a hostage against any plots her mother, Queen, might foment. King Maegor listened to each man in turn, though in the end he scorned most of the women they put forward. Some of their reasons and arguments took root in him. He would have a woman of proven fertility, he decided, though not Butterwell's fat and homely sister. He would take more than one wife, as Lord Celtigar urged. 2 wives would double his chances of getting a son. 3 wives would triple it, and one of those wives should surely be his niece. Amidst political turmoil and threats to the throne, Rhaena Targaryen faces difficult choices to protect her family and kingdom, ultimately leading to a triple wedding orchestrated by King Maegor, That was wisdom in Lord Orion's council. Queen Alyssa and her two youngest children remained in hiding. It was thought that they had fled across the narrow sea to Tyrosh, or perhaps Volantis, but they still represented a threat to Maegor's crown. And any son he might father, taking Aenys' daughter to wife, would weaken any claims put forward by her younger siblings. After the death of her husband and her flight to Fair Isle, Rhaena Targaryen had acted quickly to protect her daughters. If Prince Aegon had truly been the king, by law, his eldest daughter, Arya, stood his heir and might therefore claim to be the rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Arya and her sister Rhaella were barely a year old, and Rhaena knew that to trumpet such claims would be tantamount to condemning them to death. Instead, she dyed their hair, changed their names, and sent them from her, entrusting them to certain powerful allies who would see them fostered in good homes by worthy men, who would have no inkling of their true identities. Even their mother must not know where the girls were going, the princess insisted. What she did not know, she could not reveal, even under torture. No such escape was possible for Rhaena Targaryen herself. Though she could change her name, dye her hair, and garb herself in a tavern wench's rough spun or the robes of a scepter, there was no disguising her dragon. Dreamfire was a slender, pale blue she-dragon with silvery markings who had already produced 2 clutches of eggs, and Rhaena had been riding her since the age of 12. Dragons are not easily hidden. Instead, the princess took them both as far from Maegor as she could, to Fair Isle, where Mark Farman granted her the hospitality of Fair Castle with its tall, white towers rising high above the sunset sea. And there she rested, reading, praying, wondering how long she would be given before her uncle sent for her. Rhaena never doubted that he would, she said afterward. It was a question of when, not if. The summons came sooner than she would have liked, though not as soon as she might have feared. There was no question of defiance. That would only bring the king down on Fair Isle with Balerion. Rhaena had grown fond of Lord Farman and more than fond of his second son, Andrew. She would not repay their kindness with fire and blood. She mounted Dreamfire and flew to the Red Keep, where she learned that she must marry her uncle, her husband's killer. And there as well, Rhaena met her fellow brides, for this was to be a triple wedding. Lady Jane of House Westerling had been married to Alan Tarbeck, who had died with Prince Aegon in the battle beneath the God's Eye. A few months later, she had given her late lord a healthy son. Tall and slender with lustrous brown hair, Lady Jane was being courted by a younger son of the Lord of Casterly Rock when Maegor sent for her, but this meant little and less to the king. More troubling was the case of Lady Eleanor of House Costain, the wife of Sir Theo Bowling, a landed knight who had fought for the king in his last campaign against the poor fellows. They were only 19. Lady Eleanor had already given Bowling 3 sons when the king's eye fell upon her. The youngest boy was still at her breast when Sir Theo was arrested by the king's guard and charged with conspiring with Queen Alyssa to murder the king and place the boy on the Iron Throne. Though Bowling protested his innocence, he was found guilty and beheaded the same day. King Maegor gave his widow 7 days to mourn him in honor of the gods, then summoned her to tell her they would marry. At the town of Stony Sept, Septon Moon denounced King Maegor's wedding plans, and hundreds of town folk cheered wildly, but few others dared to raise their voices against his grace. The High Septon took ship at Old Town, sailing to King's Landing to perform the marriage rites. On a warm spring day in the 47th year after the conquest, Maegor Targaryen took 3 wives in the ward of the Red Keep. Though each of his new queens was garbed and cloaked in the colors of her father's house, the people of King's Landing called them the Black Brides, for all were widows. The presence of Lady Jane's son and Lady Eleanor's 3 boys at the wedding ensured that they would play their parts in the ceremony. But there were many who expected some show of defiance from Princess Rhaena. Such hopes were quelled when Queen Tiana appeared, escorting 2 young girls with silver hair and purple eyes, clad in the red and black of House Targaryen. "You were foolish to think you could hide them from me," Tiana told the princess. Rhaena bowed her head and spoke her vows in a voice as cold as ice. The night following the wedding of King Maegor and his 3 queens, was filled with rumors and uncertainties, leading to a series of tragic events and ultimately contributing to the downfall of his reign. Many queer and contradictory stories are told of the night that followed, and with the passage of so many years, it is difficult to separate truth from legends. Did the three black brides share a single bed, as some claim? It seems unlikely. Did His Grace visit all three women during the night and consummate all three unions? Perhaps. Did Princess Rhaena attempt to kill the king with a dagger concealed beneath her pillows, as she later claimed? Did Eleanor Coston scratch the king's back to bloody ribbons as they coupled? Did Jane Westerling drink the fertility potion that Queen Tiana supposedly brought her, or threw it in the older woman's face? Was such a potion ever mixed or offered? The first account of it does not appear until well into the reign of King Jaehaerys, 20 years after both women were dead. This we know in the aftermath of the wedding. Maegor declared Rhaena's daughter Aeria his lawful heir until such time as the gods grant me a son, while sending her twin Rhaela to Old Town to be raised as a scepter. His nephew Jaehaerys, the rightful heir by all the laws of the Seven Kingdoms, was expressly disinherited in the same decree. Queen Jane's son was confirmed as Lord of Tarbeck Hall and sent to Casterly Rock to be raised as a ward of Lyman Lannister. Queen Eleanor's elder boys were similarly disposed of, one to the Eyrie, one to High Garden. The Queen's youngest babe was turned over to a wet nurse, as the King found the Queen's nursing irksome. Half a year later, Edward Celtigar, the King's hand, had announced that Queen Jane was with child. Hardly had her belly begun to swell when the King himself revealed that Queen Eleanor was also pregnant. Maegor showered both women with gifts and honors and granted new lands and offices to their fathers, brothers, and uncles. But his joy proved to be short-lived. 3 moons before she was due, Queen Jane was brought to bed by a sudden onset of labor pains, and was delivered of a stillborn child as monstrous as the one Alice Haraway had birthed. A legless and armless creature possessed of both male and female genitalia, nor did the mother long survive the child. Maegor was cursed, men said. He had slain his nephew, made war against the faith and the High Septon, defied the gods, committed murder and incest, adultery of rape. His privy parts were poisoned, his seed full of worms, the gods would never grant him a living son, so the whispers ran. Maegor himself settled on a different explanation, and sent Sir Owen Bush and Sir Maedon Moore to seize Queen Tiana and deliver her to the dungeons. There the Pentoshi Queen made a full confession. Even as the king's torturers readied their implements, she had poisoned Jane Westerling's child in the womb, just as she had Alice Haraway's. It would be the same with Eleanor Coston's whelp, she promised. It is said that the king slew her himself, cutting out her heart with black fire and feeding it to his dogs. But even in death, Tiana of the Tower had her revenge. For it came to pass, just as she had promised. The moon turned and turned again, and in the black of night, Queen Eleanor too was delivered of a malformed and stillborn child, an eyeless boy born with rudimentary wings. That was in the 48th year after the conquest, the 6th year of King Maegor's reign, and the last year of his life. No man in the 7 kingdoms could doubt that the king was accursed. Now, what followers still remained to him began to melt away, evaporating, like dew in the morning sun. Word reached King's Landing that Sir Joffrey Doggett had been seen entering River Run, not as a captive, but as a guest of Lord Tully. A Septon moon appeared once more, leading thousands of the faithful on a march across the reach to Old Town, with the announced intent of bearding the Lix Little in the Starry Sept to demand that he denounce the abomination on the Iron Throne and lift his ban on the military orders. When Lord O'Hart and Lord Rowan appeared before him with their levies, they came not to attack Moon, but to join him. Lord Celtigar resigned as King's Hand and returned to his seat on Floor Isle. Reports from the Dornish marches suggested that the Dornish men were gathering in the passes, preparing to invade the realm. The worst blow came from Storm's End. There, on the shores of Shipbreaker Bay, Lord Rogar Baratheon proclaimed young Jaehaerys Targaryen to be the true and lawful king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, and Prince Jaehaerys, named Lord Rhogar, protector of the realm, and hand of the king. Prince Jaehaerys' claim to the throne sparks a rebellion against the cruel King Maegor, whose reign ends in a bloody mystery within the Red Keep. Prince's mother, Queen Alyssa, and his sister, Alice, stood beside him as Jaehaerys dragged Dark Sister and vowed to end the reign of his usurping uncle. 100 banner lords and Stormland knights cheered the proclamation. Prince Jaehaerys was 14 years old when he claimed the throne, a handsome youth skilled with lance and longbow, and a gifted rider. More, he rode a great bronze and tan beast called Vermithor, and his sister Alyssa, a maid of 12, commanded her own dragon, Silverwing. Maegor has only one dragon, Lord Rhogar told the Stormlord. Our prince has 2, and soon 3. When word reached the Red Keep that Jaehaerys was gathering his forces at Storm's End, Rhaena Targaryen mounted Dreamfire and flew to join him, abandoning the uncle she'd been forced to wed. She took her daughter, Aeria, and Blackfyre, stolen from the king's own scabbard as he slept. King's response was sluggish and confused. He commanded the Grand Master to send forth his ravens, summoning all his leal lords and bannermen to gather at King's Landing, only to find that Bennifer had taken ship for Pentos. Finding Princess Aeria gone, he sent a rider to Old Town to demand the head of her twin sister, Rhaella, to punish their mother for her betrayal. But Lord Hightower imprisoned his messenger instead. 2 of his king's guard vanished one night to go over to Jaehaerys, and Sir Owen Bush was found dead outside a brothel, his member stuffed into his mouth. Lord Balerion of Driftmark was amongst the first to declare for Jaehaerys. As the Valerians were the realm's traditional admirals, Maegor awoke to find he had lost the entire royal fleet. The Tyrells of Highgarden followed with all the power of the Reach, the high towers of Old Town, the red wines of the Arbor, the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, the Arryns of the Eyrie, the Royce of Runestone. One by one they came out against the king. In King's Landing, a score of lesser lords gathered at Maegor's command, amongst them Lord Darklin of Duskendale, Lord Massey of Stone Dance, Lord Towers of Hall, Lord Stanton of Rook's Rest, Lord Bar Emmon of Sharp Point, Lord Buckwell of the Antlers, the Lords Rosby, Stokeworth, Hayford, Hart, Birch, Ford, Bywater, and Mallory. Yet they commanded scarce 4,000 men amongst them all, and only 1 in 10 of those were knights. Maegor brought them together in the Red Keep one night to discuss his plan of battle. When they saw how few they were, and realized that no great lords were coming to join them, many lost heart, and Lord Hayford went so far as to urge his grace to abdicate and take the Black. His grace ordered Hayford beheaded on the spot, and continued the war council with his lordship's head mounted on a lance behind the Iron Throne. All day the lords made plans, and late into the night, it was the hour of the wolf, when at last May allowed them to take their leave. But the king remained behind, brooding on the Iron Throne as they departed. Lord Towers and Lord Rosby were the last to see his grace. Hours later, as dawn was breaking, the last of Maegor's queens came seeking after him. Queen Eleanor found him still upon the Iron Throne, pale and dead, his robes soaked through with blood. His arms had been slashed open from wrist to elbow on jagged barbs, and another blade had gone through his neck to emerge beneath his chin. Many to this day believe it was the Iron Throne itself that killed him. Maegor was alive when Rosby and Towers left the throne room, they argue, and the guards at the door swore that no one entered afterward until Queen Eleanor made her discovery. Some say it was the Queen herself who forced him down onto those barbs and blades to avenge the murder of her first husband. The king's guard might have done the deed, though that would have required them to act in consent, as there were 2 knights posted at each door. It might also have been a person or persons unknown, entering and leaving the throne room through some hidden passage. The Red Keep has its secrets, known only to the dead. It might also be that the king tasted despair in the dark watches of the night, and took his own life, twisting the blades as needed, and opening his veins to spare himself the defeat and disgrace that surely awaited him. The reign of King Maegor I Targaryen, known to history and legend as Maegor the Cruel, lasted 6 years and 66 days. Jaehaerys, the Targaryen's ascension to the Iron Throne at a young age and his subsequent reign of reconciliation are detailed, highlighting the challenges he faced and the questionable claim to the throne. Upon his death, his corpse was burned in the yard of the Red Keep, his ashes interred afterward on Dragonstone beside those of his mother. He died childless and left no heir of his body. Prince into king, Jaehaerys I Targaryen ascended the Iron Throne in 48 AC at the age of 14, and would rule the 7 kingdoms for the next 55 years, until his death of natural causes in 103 AC. In the later years of his reign, and during the reign of his successor, he was called the Old King for obvious reasons. But Jaehaerys was a young and vigorous man for far longer than he was an aged and feeble one, and more thoughtful scholars speak of him reverently as the conciliator. Archmaster Umber, writing a century later, famously declared that Aegon the Dragon and his sisters conquered the 7 kingdoms, 6 of them at least, but it was Jaehaerys, the conciliator, who truly made them one. His was no easy task, for his immediate predecessors had undone much of what the conqueror had built. Aenys through weakness and indecision, Maegor with his bloodlust and cruelty. The realm that Jaehaerys inherited was impoverished, war-torn, lawless, and riven with division and mistrust, whilst the new king himself was a green boy with no experience of rule. Even his claim to the Iron Throne was not wholly beyond question. Although Jaehaerys was the only surviving son of King Aenys I, his older brother Aegon had claimed the kingship before him. Aegon, the uncrowned, had died at the battle beneath the God's Eye whilst trying to unseat his uncle Maegor, but not before taking to wife his sister Rhaena and siring 2 daughters, the twins Aeria and Rhaena. If Maegor the Cruel were accounted only a usurper with no right to rule, as certain masters argued, then Prince Aegon had been the true king, and the succession by rights should pass to his elder daughter Aeria, not his younger brother. The sex of the twins weighed against them, however, as did their age. The girls were but 6 at Maegor's death. Furthermore, accounts left us by contemporaries suggest that Princess Arya was a timid child when young, much given to tears and bedwetting, whilst Rhaena, the bolder and more robust of the pair, was a novice, serving at the Starry Set, and promised to the faith. Neither seemed to have the makings of a queen. Their own mother, Queen Rhaena, conceded as much when she agreed that the crown should go to her brother Jaehaerys, rather than her daughters. Some suggested that Rhaena herself might have the strongest claim to the crown, as the firstborn child of King Aenys and Queen Alyssa. There were even some who whispered that it was Queen Rhaena who had somehow contrived to free the realm from Maegor the Cruel, though by what means she might have arranged his death after fleeing King's Landing on her dragon Dreamfire has never been successfully established. "This is not dawn," Lord Rhaegar Baratheon said when the notion was put to him, and Rhaena is not Nymeria. Moreover, the twice-widow queen had come to lose King's Landing and the court, and wished only to return to Fair Isle, where she had found a measure of peace before her uncle had made her one of his black brides. Prince Jaehaerys was still a year and a half shy of manhood when he first ascended the Iron Throne. Thus it was determined that his mother, the Dowager Queen Alyssa, would act as regent for him, whilst Lord Rhaegar served as his hand and the protector of the realm. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. See you again soon. Thanks for watching.